For 6 months, my sister told everyone I was dying of cancer. She forged medical documents. She started a fundraiser that raised $43,000. She convinced my parents to stop speaking to me. She got my employer to put me on medical leave. And I had no idea any of it was happening until a stranger asked me how the chemo was going. Welcome back to Calm Drama Story. This one is about the most elaborate lie anyone has ever told about me, and how I destroyed it with something my sister never thought I'd be able to produce: my actual medical records. Hit subscribe right now and drop a comment, because this story is going to make you question everything you think you know about family. Now let me tell you exactly how I discovered my sister had spent half a year telling the world I was dying, and what happened when I showed up to a family meeting with 100 pages of proof that I was perfectly healthy. My name is Jessica Torres, and I'm 31 years old. 8 months ago, I discovered my younger sister had spent half a year telling everyone I knew that I had terminal cancer and was refusing treatment, that I was dying and too stubborn to fight, that I'd given up on life and was letting the disease win. She'd forged medical documents with my name on them, showing stage 3 diagnoses and treatment plans I'd never seen. She'd started a crowdfunding campaign that raised over $40,000 for medical bills I didn't have. She'd convinced my parents to stop speaking to me because I was in denial about my condition. She'd gotten my employer to put me on forced medical leave with documentation I never signed. And I had no idea any of it was happening until a former colleague I hadn't spoken to in months asked me how I was feeling and whether the chemo was helping. This is the story of how I destroyed the most elaborate lie anyone has ever told about me with something my sister never thought I'd be able to produce: my actual medical records proving I was completely, perfectly healthy. Let me tell you what it's like to discover that someone you've known your entire life has been systematically destroying your reputation with a lie so specific and so well documented that even people who love you believe it without question. I'm the older sister in my family, born in 1993, and my sister Claire came 3 years later in 1996. And from the moment we were old enough to have distinct personalities, we were different in ways that made it hard to be close. I was the quiet one, the kid who preferred reading to playing outside, who got decent grades without much drama, who had a small group of close friends rather than being popular, who went to college for marketing and got a job at a decent firm and built a stable, boring life that satisfied me even if it didn't impress anyone. Claire was the opposite in every possible way: loud, dramatic, always needing attention, always involved in some crisis or another, always positioning herself at the center of whatever was happening, whether it actually concerned her or not. She was the kid who cried at other people's birthday parties until she got a present too. She was the teenager who showed up at my college graduation and made a scene about how no one had properly celebrated her recent breakup. She was the adult who needed constant validation and seemed genuinely unable to exist without being the focus of concern or sympathy or admiration. As adults living in the same city, we maintained what I'd call a polite distance. We saw each other at family dinners once or twice a month, at holidays, at the occasional event one of us was hosting. We were friendly, but not close. Cordial, but not confiding. The kind of sisters who could coexist at family events without friction, but who didn't call each other just to chat or meet up for coffee, or know the details of each other's daily lives. I was fine with that arrangement. I had my own friends, my own life, my own small circle of people I was actually close to, and I didn't need my relationship with Claire to be more than it was. I thought she felt the same way. I was wrong. I didn't understand until much later that Claire wasn't satisfied with polite distance, that she needed drama and attention the way other people need oxygen. And if drama wasn't happening naturally in her own life, she'd create it in mine. The lies started in ways I didn't notice because they were happening in conversations I wasn't part of, in phone calls between Claire and our parents that didn't involve me, in social media posts that didn't tag me. Claire started telling our parents, Elena and Robert, that she was worried about me. She said I'd mentioned feeling tired a lot when we'd had coffee the week before, that I'd lost weight, that I looked pale, that she'd noticed I was being vague about my health when she asked how I was feeling. Our parents, who are loving but also the kind of people who worry intensely about health issues because they're in their 60s and have started experiencing their own aging bodies betraying them in small ways, called me to ask if everything was okay. I said yes, I was fine, just busy with a big project at work. Maybe not sleeping quite enough, but nothing serious. They seemed satisfied. I thought that was the end of it. Claire told them I was in denial, that I was minimizing symptoms, that I was too proud to admit something might be wrong, and they should keep an eye on me because she had a bad feeling something serious was happening that I wasn't acknowledging. That conversation happened in March. I found out about it in September, 6 months later, when the entire lie had grown into something so massive and so detailed that it had fundamentally altered my life in ways I hadn't even noticed were connected. In those 6 months, Claire built a complete fictional narrative of my terminal illness, using forged documents, manipulated conversations, and a deep understanding of exactly which people in my life to target to cause maximum damage while keeping me in the dark. She told our parents in April that I'd been diagnosed with cancer, stage 3, but that I was refusing treatment because I didn't want to be a burden on the family, because I'd decided I'd rather let nature take its course than put everyone through the stress and expense of fighting something I believed was unbeatable. She showed them medical documents she'd created herself, using templates she found online, and information she'd gathered from medical websites, complete with my name, a local oncologist's name she'd pulled from a hospital directory, detailed pathology reports describing tumor sizes and metastasis that sounded terrifyingly real because she'd copied the language directly from actual medical reports she found in cancer forums. My parents believed her completely. They believed her because Claire cried when she told them, because she showed them documentation that looked official, because the details were so specific that it seemed impossible they could be fabricated, because they wanted to believe that if something terrible was happening to their daughter, someone in the family knew about it and was trying to help. They called me once after Claire told them, a conversation I remember because it was strange and tense in ways I didn't understand at the time. My mother asked if I was taking care of myself, if I was seeing doctors regularly, if there was anything I needed to tell them about my health. I said I was fine, that I'd had my annual physical a few months ago, and everything was normal, that I didn't know why everyone was suddenly so concerned about my health, but I appreciated them caring. My mother's voice got tight when I said that, this particular quality of upset that I couldn't place, and she said something about how she wished I would trust them enough to tell them the truth, and then she said they loved me and they'd be there whenever I was ready to talk, and she hung up. I sat there confused, wondering what truth she thought I was hiding, but I had work to call me back, and I forgot about it by the next day. Claire told them that my response proved I was in denial, that I was so deep in my refusal to acknowledge the diagnosis that I was lying even to them, and that they needed to respect my space while I processed whatever I was going through psychologically, because pushing me would just make me withdraw further. My parents, who wanted to believe they were doing the right thing by their daughter, even if they didn't understand her choices, stopped calling me regularly. They stopped inviting me to family dinners. They stopped asking about my life. When I called them to check in, they were brief and sad and distant in ways that hurt my feelings, but that I attributed to them being busy or stressed about something I didn't know about. I thought maybe they were having marriage problems or health issues they didn't want to discuss. I gave them space. I had no idea they thought I was dying, and that giving me space was their misguided attempt to honor what they believed were my wishes. In June, 3 months into her lie, Claire escalated. She contacted my employer, a mid-sized marketing firm where I'd worked for 6 years as a senior account manager, and she told HR that I needed immediate medical leave for cancer treatment, but that I was too proud to ask for it myself. She backed up her claim with forged FMLA paperwork that she'd created using templates and my forged signature, complete with a doctor's certification that I needed 12 weeks of continuous leave for chemotherapy and radiation. The documentation looked legitimate enough that HR didn't question it. They didn't call me to verify because the paperwork explicitly stated that I was experiencing severe emotional distress about my diagnosis, and that direct contact about my medical situation would be harmful to my mental health. They put me on medical leave effective immediately and sent me an email saying they'd approved my FMLA request and that I should focus on my health and not worry about work, that my job would be protected, that I should reach out to HR when I was ready to discuss my return timeline. I received that email on a Tuesday morning while I was sitting at my desk working on a client presentation. I read it 3 times, trying to understand what FMLA request they were referring to, what medical leave I'd supposedly applied for, why they were telling me my job was protected when I hadn't asked for time off. I called HR immediately. The woman I spoke to sounded confused by my confusion, asked if I hadn't requested medical leave for cancer treatment, said they had all the documentation on file, including doctor's orders. I told her I hadn't requested anything, that I didn't have cancer, that someone had clearly submitted fraudulent paperwork. She said the signature on the forms was mine, that the doctor's information was verified, that this wasn't something they could just dismiss. I asked to see the paperwork. She said she'd send it to me, and that we could schedule a meeting to discuss the situation. The paperwork arrived in my email an hour later. My hands shook as I opened the attachments, and saw my name on medical certification forms I'd never seen before. A signature that looked enough like mine that I could see why someone would believe it was real. A doctor's name I didn't recognize, certifying that I had stage 3 cancer and needed immediate treatment. I called the doctor's office listed on the forms. They'd never heard of me. I wasn't a patient. They'd never provided any medical certification with my name on it. I asked if they'd reported any fraud or forgery to the police. They said no. They hadn't known about it. I took detailed notes of my conversation with their office manager, got her name and direct contact information, and then I called HR back and explained that the forms were completely fraudulent, that the doctor's office confirmed I wasn't a patient, that I needed this medical leave reversed immediately because I didn't have cancer and I hadn't requested time off. The HR director said they'd investigate, but that in the meantime, since the forms had been submitted under my name and appeared legitimate, I needed to remain on leave until they could verify the situation. I felt like I was losing my mind. Someone had forged medical documents about me having cancer, submitted them to my employer, and now I was being forced onto medical leave for a disease I didn't have while my company investigated fraud I was the victim of. I hired a lawyer that day, an employment attorney who specialized in FMLA issues, and she advised me to document everything, to get written confirmation from the doctor's office that I wasn't a patient and that the forms were fraudulent, to request my own medical records from every doctor I'd actually seen to prove I didn't have any cancer diagnosis, and to file a police report for identity theft and fraud. I did all of that over the next week, while simultaneously trying to figure out who would do this to me and why. I suspected it might be a disgruntled coworker or a client I'd had problems with, someone who wanted to damage my career or get me removed from an account they were unhappy with. It never occurred to me that it was my sister, not until July, when Claire expanded her campaign to include my friends and started raising money. She created a crowdfunding campaign on a major fundraising platform, using my full name and photos she'd taken from my social media, with a heartbreaking story about how I was fighting stage 3 cancer, but couldn't afford the experimental treatments that might save my life, how I was too proud to ask for help, but desperately needed financial support for medical bills my insurance wouldn't cover. She wrote about watching her sister suffer, about how scared she was that I wouldn't survive, about how she was doing everything she could to help, but she couldn't fund my treatment alone. She set a goal of $50,000. The campaign went viral in our local community. Friends I hadn't spoken to in months started sharing it. Former colleagues contributed. People from my high school I barely remembered sent donations. Extended family members I saw once a year at weddings contributed thousands. The campaign raised $43,000 in less than 3 weeks. I didn't know about any of it because Claire had been strategic about who she shared the campaign with. targeting people I wasn't in regular contact with. People who knew me well enough to care, but not well enough to verify the story with me directly. She created a narrative where my silence about my illness was explained by my deep denial and fierce independence, where reaching out to me directly would be violating my privacy and making things harder for me. People believed her because she was my sister, because she seemed genuinely devastated, because the campaign page had photos of me and detailed medical information that sounded authentic. She updated the page regularly with posts about my progress through treatment, about setbacks and small victories, about how grateful she was for everyone's support. She positioned herself as the devoted sister standing by me through the hardest fight of my life, while I was actually sitting in my apartment, still on forced medical leave from work, trying to prove to my employer that I wasn't dying. I found out about the fundraiser by complete accident on a Saturday in late August, when I ran into a former colleague named Diane at a coffee shop near my apartment. Diane and I had worked together 3 years earlier, before she left for another company, and we'd stayed friendly in that casual way, where you like each other's Instagram posts but don't actually make plans to meet up. She approached me while I was waiting for my latte, smiling but with this sad, concerned expression that I couldn't place, and she asked how I was feeling, if the treatments were helping, if there was anything she could do to support me. I stared at her, confused, asked what treatments she was talking about, and I watched her face change as she realized I had no idea what she was referring to. She pulled out her phone and showed me the fundraiser page, my face on the screen, my name in the title, Claire's words describing my battle with cancer, my refusal to give up, my desperate need for help paying for treatments that might save my life. I felt like the ground had dropped out from under me. I scrolled through the page reading Claire's updates, seeing the $43,000 total, reading comments from people I knew expressing their support and prayers and sharing their own cancer stories, feeling physically sick as I realized the scope of what my sister had done. Diane was talking, asking questions, but I couldn't process what she was saying because my brain was trying to catch up to a reality that didn't make any sense. My sister had told the entire world I was dying. She'd created a fake medical emergency, raised tens of thousands of dollars, positioned herself as my caretaker and my hero, and she'd done it all using my name and my face and details about my life that could only have come from someone who knew me personally. I told Diane there was a mistake, that I didn't have cancer, that I'd never authorized this campaign, and I watched her face shift from concern to confusion to something that looked like she didn't know whether to believe me. I left the coffee shop without my latte and went straight home to investigate. I found the campaign page and read every update Claire had posted over the past 2 months. She'd created an entire timeline of my fictional illness, complete with specific dates of diagnosis, treatment schedules, doctor visits, setbacks, and improvements. She'd described conversations we'd supposedly had about my fears and my hopes, words I'd never said, moments that had never happened. She'd thanked donors by name in her updates, people I knew and loved, people who'd given monies thinking they were helping me. I felt violated in a way I couldn't articulate, like someone had stolen my identity and my life and my relationships and used them to build something terrible, while I was completely unaware it was happening. I started making calls. I called friends who donated to ask if they'd heard about my illness from anyone else. They said Claire had contacted them privately, had shown them medical information, had asked them not to reach out to me directly because I was overwhelmed and needed space. I called distant relatives who'd contributed. Same story. Claire had positioned herself as the gatekeeper of information about my illness, the only person who could talk about it, because I was too fragile to handle people asking questions. I called my parents. My mother answered, and I could hear in her voice that she'd been crying. That raw quality that comes from prolonged grief. I asked her why she'd been avoiding me for months. She said they were trying to respect my wishes, that Claire had told them I needed space to process my diagnosis, that they were heartbroken I wasn't fighting, but they understood I had to make my own choices. I felt something inside me go cold and still. I asked my mother what diagnosis she was talking about. There was a long pause. Then she said, very quietly, that they knew about the cancer, that Claire had shown them the medical records, that they were devastated I hadn't told them myself, but they were trying to support me the way I needed to be supported, even if they didn't agree with my decision to refuse treatment. I told her I didn't have cancer. I told her I'd never been diagnosed with anything serious. I told her Claire was lying, and that she'd been lying for months. My mother's voice changed, got sharp and defensive, and she said Claire wouldn't lie about something like that she'd shown them official documents, that I was clearly in denial about my condition, and they'd been patient, but if I was going to refuse help, then there was nothing they could do. She hung up on me. I sat on my couch in my apartment and tried to understand how my entire life had been hijacked by a lie, while I was just living normally, going to work, seeing friends, existing in the world without any idea that everyone around me thought I was dying. I made a decision in that moment. I was going to prove Claire was lying, and I was going to do it with documentation so official and so thorough that no one could claim I was in denial, or that the records were fake, or that I was hiding the truth. I contacted every doctor I'd seen in the past 5 years and requested my complete medical records with expedited processing. I paid extra for rush service. I wanted every test result, every visit summary, every scan, every lab report, every piece of paper with my name on it that documented my actual health. It took a week to get everything because I'd seen multiple doctors for different things over the years. My general practitioner for annual checkups and a few minor illnesses, a dermatologist for a weird rash that turned out to be nothing, an urgent care doctor when I had the flu badly enough that I needed a prescription. I compiled everything into a single comprehensive file, over 100 pages of official documentation from multiple medical providers, all showing the same thing. I was healthy. No cancer, no chronic conditions, no serious diagnoses, just routine care and minor treatable issues that had all resolved normally. I scheduled a meeting at my parents' house. I told them I needed to talk to them about something important, and I needed Claire to be there too. I didn't explain what it was about. I arrived on a Sunday afternoon with my laptop and a folder full of printed medical records, and a determination to end this lie so completely that it could never resurrect itself. My parents were there, along with Claire and 2 family friends, who'd contributed significantly to the fundraiser. People my parents had invited because they thought this was some kind of intervention, where I'd finally admit I was sick and agree to get help. I sat down in my parents' living room, and I looked at Claire, and I felt nothing but cold fury at what she'd done, and how thoroughly she'd convinced everyone I loved that I was dying. I started by asking Claire to explain her concerns about my health. I kept my voice calm and neutral, gave her no indication I knew what she'd been doing. Claire, not knowing I'd discovered everything, launched into her performance. She talked about how worried she'd been for months, how she'd noticed I was losing weight and looking tired, how she'd finally confronted me about seeing a doctor, and how I'd eventually admitted I'd been diagnosed with stage 3 cancer, but that I'd decided not to pursue aggressive treatment. She said I'd told her I didn't want to put the family through the stress of watching me fight something I believed was unbeatable, that I'd sworn her to secrecy, but she couldn't keep it secret anymore because she was watching me deteriorate, and she couldn't stand by and do nothing. She cried while she talked, real tears. She was convincing. I watched my parents' faces and saw they believed every word. I let her talk for about 10 minutes, let her build her story with all the details she'd crafted over months, let her position herself as the devastated sister who was trying to save me from myself. Then I opened my laptop, pulled up the medical records I'd compiled, and I asked her, very calmly, to explain why none of my actual doctors had diagnosed me with cancer. The room went completely silent. Claire's face lost all color. I turned my laptop around so everyone could see the screen, and I pulled up the first document, a summary from my general practitioner dated 6 weeks ago, showing my most recent physical exam, with completely normal results across the board. I scrolled through the file showing document after document from different providers, all with official letterheads, all with doctor signatures, all showing I was healthy. I explained that I'd requested comprehensive records from every medical provider I'd seen in 5 years, specifically to prove that Claire's story was a complete fabrication. Claire tried to recover. She said the records must be fake, that I must have falsified them somehow, that this proved how deep my denial went, if I was creating fake documents to hide my real diagnosis. I'd anticipated this. I pulled up contact information for every doctor on every document, phone numbers and email addresses prominently displayed on official letterhead. And I handed my father my phone with my general practitioner's office already dialed. I told him to call and verify the records were real, to ask if I was a patient, to confirm I'd requested these records. My father took the phone with shaking hands and made the call. The receptionist confirmed I was a patient, confirmed they'd sent me comprehensive records the previous week at my request, confirmed the summary document matched their files. My father asked if I had any serious diagnoses or ongoing treatments. The receptionist said she couldn't provide detailed medical information over the phone, but that she could confirm I had no active treatment plans and my most recent visit showed normal, healthy results. My father hung up and looked at Claire with an expression I'd never seen on his face before. Something between betrayal and fury and complete devastation. My mother was crying, but this time it was different. Not the grief crying from before, but the shocked, horrified crying of someone whose entire understanding of reality has just shattered. Claire started talking fast, saying there must be a misunderstanding, that maybe the records were from before the diagnosis, that maybe I'd seen a specialist they didn't know about. I pulled up records from 3 different providers across different time periods, all showing the same thing. I showed them the dates. The most recent records were from a month ago. No cancer. Not ever. Claire stood up and tried to leave. I told her to sit down because I wasn't done yet. I pulled up the fundraiser page on my screen. I showed my parents the campaign Claire had created using my name and my photos. The $43,000 she'd raised for medical treatments I'd never needed. The detailed updates she'd posted, describing my battle with a disease I didn't have. I showed them the comments from friends and family who'd donated. People who believed they were helping me because my own sister had told them I was dying. I explained that I'd already contacted the fundraising platform to report fraud, that I'd filed police reports for identity theft and forgery, that I'd sent cease and desist letters to everyone Claire had contacted with her lies. I told them that the medical leave I'd been forced to take from work was based on forged FMLA paperwork Claire had created and submitted without my knowledge. I showed them everything, document after document, the full scope of Claire's elaborate lie, presented with official documentation that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. Claire ran from the room, just got up and ran out of the house, without saying anything, without defending herself, without trying to explain. My mother went after her. My father sat in his chair, looking like he'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes, staring at my laptop screen where the fundraiser page was still visible, with its $43,000 total and Claire's tearful updates about my fictional illness. The family friends who'd come for what they thought was an intervention were sitting frozen, trying to process what they'd just witnessed. One of them had donated $5,000 to the campaign. I told them I was working with the platform to return all the money to donors, that I'd make sure everyone got refunded, that I was sorry they'd been manipulated, but I'd had no knowledge of any of this until 2 weeks ago. The legal aftermath took months to resolve. I filed formal complaints with the police for fraud, identity theft, and forgery. The crowdfunding platform froze the account and began the process of returning funds to donors, which took weeks of documentation and verification, but eventually resulted in every contributor getting their money back. I filed complaints with the medical board about the doctor whose name Claire had forged on documents, worked with the doctor's office to document the fraud for their own records, and potential legal action. I provided everything to my employer's HR department and worked with them to reverse the fraudulent medical leave and restore my position, though the damage to my professional reputation took longer to repair because people who'd heard I was on medical leave for cancer didn't always get the follow-up information that it had been fraud. My relationship with my parents was shattered in ways that took years to even begin addressing. They'd believed Claire's lie completely, had cut me off emotionally for months, thinking they were respecting my wishes, had been grieving my impending death while I lived my normal life, unaware of what they were going through. When the truth came out, they were devastated not just by Claire's betrayal, but by their own willingness to believe I'd hide something so serious from them, by the realization that they'd chosen to believe the dramatic story over the simpler truth that I was fine and their other daughter was lying. My mother especially struggled with guilt over the months she'd avoided me. The birthday she'd missed because she was too sad about my illness to celebrate. The calls she hadn't returned because she couldn't bear to hear my voice, knowing she thought I was dying. We started family therapy 6 months after everything came out. It helped, slowly, to have a mediator who could help us process the damage and rebuild trust that had been destroyed by Claire's manipulation. Claire herself faced criminal charges. The district attorney pursued fraud charges based on the crowdfunding campaign and identity theft charges based on the forged medical documents and FMLA paperwork. She eventually pleaded guilty to felony fraud and was sentenced to 2 years in prison, with possibility of parole after 18 months, along with restitution requirements for any costs I'd incurred dealing with her fraud, including lawyer fees, and the therapy I'd needed to process the trauma of discovering my sister had tried to destroy my life. She served 14 months and was released early for good behavior. I didn't attend her sentencing hearing. I didn't visit her in prison. I didn't respond to the letter she sent me, trying to explain herself, saying she'd been dealing with mental health issues, that she'd gotten in too deep and didn't know how to stop, that she was sorry for hurting me. I read the letters once, and then I threw them away, because I didn't believe her apology was genuine, and I didn't think understanding her motivations would change what she'd done. My parents maintained some relationship with Claire after she was released from prison, though nothing like what it had been before. They helped her find housing and employment, because she was their daughter, and they couldn't completely abandon her, despite what she'd done. But the easy trust and unconditional support was gone. They second-guessed everything she told them, verified information independently, maintained careful boundaries about what they shared with her about their lives, or my life. Claire and I have had no direct contact since that day in my parents' living room, when I confronted her with my medical records. She lives in a different part of the city now, works at a job that has nothing to do with healthcare or fundraising. And according to my parents, she's in therapy and on medication for issues she claims contributed to her behavior. I don't know if that's true, and I don't particularly care. Whatever Claire's problems were, she chose to solve them by destroying my life, and that's not something I'm interested in forgiving or forgetting. Rebuilding my own life took longer than I expected. My employer restored my position and expunged the fraudulent medical leave from my record, but colleagues who'd heard about my supposed cancer diagnosis through the rumor mill never got clear information about what had actually happened. Some people thought I'd recovered miraculously. Others thought the diagnosis had been wrong. A few knew the truth, but most didn't. And I got tired of explaining it, so eventually I just stopped bringing it up. I changed jobs 18 months later, partly for career advancement, but partly to start fresh somewhere without the cloud of that situation hanging over me. My relationships with friends were damaged in varied ways. Some people felt betrayed that I hadn't told them what was happening when they'd donated to what they thought was my medical fund, even though I'd had no idea it existed. Others felt embarrassed they'd believed Claire so readily, without verifying the story with me directly. A few relationships survived stronger, because people understood I'd been a victim of something terrible, and they stepped up to support me through the aftermath, rather than making it about their own feelings. The experience changed how I think about truth and documentation, and the power of official records to counter even the most elaborate lies. Claire had built her fiction with forged documents and manipulated conversations and strategic targeting of people who'd believe her story, and she'd nearly destroyed my life with it, because she understood that people trust official-looking paperwork and trust sisters who cry convincingly when they talk about their siblings dying. But she hadn't counted on me being able to produce better documentation, real medical records from real doctors with real signatures and real contact information that could be verified, evidence so thorough and so official that her forgeries looked like the cheap lies they were when placed side by side with the truth. She'd gambled that I either wouldn't find out about her lie, or that if I did, I wouldn't be able to prove she was lying, because medical records are private and hard to get, and most people wouldn't go through the hassle of requesting comprehensive documentation from multiple providers. She lost that gamble. I'm 32 now, just over a year past the confrontation that ended Claire's lie and started the long process of legal proceedings and relationship repair, and learning to trust people again after discovering that my own sister could lie so thoroughly about something so serious. I still have the folder of medical records I compiled, over 100 pages of documentation proving I was healthy, stored in my apartment like a talisman against future lies. I probably don't need them anymore. The fraud case is closed. The fundraiser money was returned. My employer knows the truth. My parents know the truth. But I keep them anyway, because they represent something important about the power of truth over fiction when you have the right evidence to present. Claire's lie was elaborate and convincing, and backed up with forged documents that fooled everyone who saw them. My truth was simple, and backed up with real documents that couldn't be dismissed. The truth won, but only because I was willing to do the work to document it officially and present it comprehensively, and refused to let the lie stand, even when it would have been easier to just let it fade away. Some people who know the story ask if I'll ever reconcile with Claire, if enough time will pass that I'll be willing to have a relationship with her again, if family means we eventually have to forgive and move forward. I tell them what I've learned through this experience. Family is people who show up for you consistently, who tell you the truth even when it's hard, who don't weaponize your identity to build elaborate fictions that destroy your reputation. Claire showed up for 6 months with forged medical records and fake fundraisers and strategic lies that poisoned my relationships with people I loved. That's not family. That's betrayal. And betrayal that deep doesn't get fixed by an apology letter from prison, or therapy, or time. It gets documented, prosecuted, and then left behind while you rebuild a life without the person who tried to destroy the one you had. I think about that coffee shop conversation with Diane sometimes, the moment when I first discovered what Claire had done, when I saw my face on that fundraiser page and realized my sister had been telling the world I was dying while I was just living my life completely unaware. I think about how different things would be if Diane hadn't approached me that day, if I'd gone months or even years longer without discovering the lie. How much more damage could have been done to my relationships and my career and my reputation. I got lucky that someone accidentally let it slip before the lie had time to become so entrenched that proving the truth would have been even harder. But I also made my own luck by refusing to accept the lie once I knew about it, by doing the work to get comprehensive documentation, by presenting the truth so thoroughly that it couldn't be denied or dismissed. Claire bet that I wouldn't fight back. She was wrong. The medical records proved it, and now everyone knows it.